The snow fell in a hushed blanket over the city, cloaking the streets in a frigid silence that pierced even the thickest coats. It was one of those biting winter nights when the wealthy scurried into their heated mansions, leaving the cold to claim the forgotten. Yet, on a weathered bench in a small, snow-dusted park near the financial district, a woman in a navy blue uniform slumped lifelessly, her body tilted to one side. Frost clung to her lace-trimmed apron, her head resting against the icy slats, barely visible beneath the accumulating snow. That woman was Grace. For 3 years, Grace had been a shadow in the opulent home of Charles Whittaker, a millionaire whose reputation rested more on his fortune than his empathy. His mansion gleamed with marble and gold, his schedule ran like clockwork, and his demands were unrelenting. To Charles, Grace was a cog in his machine, punctual, silent, and skilled at stoking the fireplace each morning before his descent. He knew little of her beyond her efficiency, never pausing to wonder where she vanished after her shifts or what burdens she carried beyond his polished walls. So when Grace arrived 5 minutes late last Friday, her red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands a stark contrast to her usual composure, Charles didn't inquire. With a cold, "You're done here," he severed her employment, offering no severance, no letter, no gratitude. Grace, too weary to protest, nodded and slipped out, leaving behind the only warmth she'd known. Unbeknownst to Charles, Grace had been living a secret life of survival. Since her mother's health crumbled back in Louisiana, she'd sent every penny home to cover mounting hospital bills and support her younger brother. With rent soaring and her hours recently slashed, she'd taken to sleeping in the mansion's cramped laundry room, tucked behind brooms and detergent. When Charles fired her, she had no savings, no bus fare, nothing but the thin soles of her shoes and that uniform. That night, she wandered the icy streets, the shelters overflowing, the train stations teeming with danger. Her phone died, and exhaustion forced her onto that bench. She meant only to rest her eyes, but the cold seeped into her bones, numbing her fingers by dawn. Charles Whittaker rarely walked anywhere, preferring the luxury of his chauffeured car. But that morning, with his driver delayed and a critical board meeting looming, he trudged through the park, his polished shoes crunching the snow, his watch a constant nag. Then he saw her. At first, the figure was just a blur, head tilted, lips parted, breath faint. As he drew closer, recognition hit like a punch. "Grace," he murmured, confusion etching his face. She didn't stir. He crouched, his gloved hand brushing her shoulder, and recoiled at her icy skin. "Grace," he barked, shaking her gently. Nothing. Panic, raw and unfamiliar, clawed at his chest, not for missed profits, but for her life. He fumbled for his phone, dialing emergency services with shaking fingers, his eyes locked on her frost-dusted face, her skewed headband, her fragile form. As sirens wailed in the distance, Charles knelt beside her, brushing snow from her arm with a trembling hand, heedless of the damp seeping into his tailored coat. For once, his mind wasn't on stocks or deals but on the woman who'd brewed his tea at dawn, folded his shirts with care, and smiled faintly at the kitchen window's spring blooms, details he'd never registered until now. The paramedics arrived, and he helped lift her onto the stretcher, following the ambulance not as her employer, but as a man grappling with guilt. In the sterile glow of the emergency room, Charles sat rigid by Grace's bed, her oxygen mask fogging faintly, for lines snaking from her arm. The nurse's words, "Severe hypothermia, another hour, and it'd be a recovery, not a rescue," echoed in his mind. For 3 years, he'd seen her as a maid, not a person battling silent despair. As machines beeped and nurses moved, he ignored calls from his board, his assistant, even his daughter's concerned text. He was awakening to a truth he'd ignored. Near midnight, Grace stirred, her eyelids fluttering, lips dry and cracked. "Am I dead?" she whispered, her voice frail. Charles leaned forward, a choked laugh escaping. No, you're alive. You're safe. Her eyes focused, widening at his presence. Why are you here? She asked, flinching. He swallowed hard. Because I should have been long before today. Tears glistened in her eyes as she turned away. I didn't steal. I didn't lie. I was never late until that day. He nodded, voice thick. And I never asked why. That's my shame, not yours. The next morning, Charles returned to his mansion with resolve. He gathered his staff, cooks, gardeners, drivers, and laid bare the truth. I fired someone without knowing her story, and it nearly cost her life. Stunned silence followed, some staff looking away, one weeping. Then, in a rare admission, he said, I'm sorry. The story spread, fueled by a jogger's viral photo of Grace on the bench. Public outrage mounted. How could a millionaire let this happen? Reporters swarmed the hospital, but Charles remained silent, saying only, I have more to do than talk. When Grace was discharged, a black town car awaited, Charles beside it with a coat and scarf. This isn't charity, he said softly. It's a correction. Though her pride resisted, the hospital bills loomed large. He insisted, stay in the guest wing, not to serve, but to recover. When you're ready, we'll decide your next step, not mine. Reluctantly, she agreed. In the weeks that followed, she healed in a sunlit guest room, a private doctor attending her. Her brother and mother were flown in, settled in an apartment Charles leased, and each evening, he visited, listening as she shared tales of her Louisiana roots and buried dreams. One morning, Charles offered her a new role, Director of Staff and Employee Welfare across his properties, salaried, with benefits and authority to ensure no one else fell through the cracks. You trust me with that? She asked, incredulous. He met her gaze. I've never trusted anyone more. Months later, at a charity gala in his ballroom, Charles took the mic. I built skyscrapers and called it power, he said, but a woman I overlooked taught me true strength. He introduced Grace, who stepped up in a simple navy dress, hair braided, to a standing ovation, not out of pity, but awe. The maid once unseen had transformed a millionaire, redeeming him through the compassion he'd failed to show. If this story moved you, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more tales of drama and heart. Comment with where you're watching from, we love hearing from you. Stay kind, stay curious, and keep watching.